Baldwin says, there is never time in the future in which we will work out our salvation. The challenge is in the moment. The time is always now. Now, if you know me, when I go to Baldwin, something's going on. Right? It's typically my way of anchoring my view of the world, and it has been a Baldwin-filled last couple of years, to say the least. Thank you, Mama Carol, and all of you for being here. I always appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to share, especially about this initiative, this truth, racial healing, and transformation. And I want to punctuate the point that this is not work that just started. Almost everyone in this room has been doing this work as a part of who we are, deeply rooted in our sense of values and person. And I remember when Ashe first hosted a conversation that was community-led about how we're going to prepare for the tricentennial. And it was an invitation to artists and culture bearers and community members and scholars and thinkers to answer the question, how will we show up in the space in a way that we get to define? And it was amazing because it provided not only an opportunity to hear from others, it gave me a chance to stop for a moment, because I don't do that as much as I used to, and do some research and some analysis on who this community is. And it won't surprise you that the evidence was striking, that a community was built at the base of the river with an amazing space by people that largely looked like me. And it was built not only on their backs, but on their brains. Their incredible talents. They were choreographers and dancers and poets and doctors and lawyers, as well as laborers. We hear that side, we don't often hear the other side. And it's only important in the context of this truth-telling that Carol talked about. And so what I want to do today is share with you briefly the framework that Kellogg and its many partners have come up with that gives us an opportunity to make some commitments around this transformation that we've been hearing about. So the Foundation for Louisiana has been investing in people and practices that work to reduce vulnerability and strengthen communities, philanthropy talk. The truth is, the founders knew after Katrina that there was a chance for us to finally acknowledge how these communities were built and the role that racialized behavior, both individual and institutional, have played in affecting our lives for good or for bad. And the Kellogg Foundation similarly has been making investments in communities towards a vision of racial healing in a way that has taught them and all of their partners around the country some important lessons. The framework for this work was developed based on those lessons and some honest truth-telling about what we've learned and what the opportunity is to build a bridge to consensus and a continuum of work that allows folks to play a role, really bringing their highest and best use to this work. So I'm going to share some of this with you, and then, Carol, if there's time, I'll gladly enjoy any questions or any additions from other folks who've been involved in this work. And so, essentially, the design of this is narrative change, and it's a pretty obvious thing to many of us. The narrative around race in America has largely been driven by powerful institutions and individuals in ways that undermine this sense of, that creates actually this sense of racial hierarchy that we're trying to jettison or eliminate. And so working with the entertainment industry, journalism and news media, digital media, publishing, school curricula, cultural institutions, monuments and parks, all of the spaces and places where we talk about or see the visualization of who we are as people and who we are in context with each other is the base for this work. There is also an element of racial healing and relationship building, right? And let's be honest with each other, there have been different responses to that. Some folks have said, oh, Do we go with the racial healing again? Which some people translate as black people having to accommodate white sensitivities around how we're going to have race conversations. I think the intention here is actually for us to enter into another level of courage and braveness, you might say, so that we can actually create spaces that not only allow us to build relationships and heal together, but also create spaces and practices that allow those of us who have been in the work, particularly people of color who have been subject to the violence of racism, to have our own healing spaces. And so there is a real opportunity for us to engage in what that looks like and to build and design around that. And then three important elements of this work that get to the transformation part of the discussion, because in my life, I am very interested in moving actual work that improves people's lives, right? We can talk all day, but what is the work that we're going to do together? How do we articulate that? I think the Kellogg team did an excellent job of framing this. One lane is separation. It includes segregation, colonization, and concentrated poverty. And the idea is to deal with issues like decolonization. We can talk about that if you guys want to, if anybody have any questions about that. Housing, health, arts and culture, of course, immigration and migration, and education and development. Again, that's in the lane of segregation, the things that keep us apart from each other. The second lane is law, civil, criminal, and public policies. It is probably no surprise to anyone in this room that legal constructs, as the founding of this country, have always created a space to uphold this racial hierarchy that Kellogg is talking about. It includes law enforcement, safety, criminal justice, juvenile justice, civil justice, mass incarceration, again, immigration and migration, and education and development again. And that's the legal construct. So you have separation, you have the law, and the third is economy, structured inequality, and barriers to opportunity. So it's employment, labor, workforce, wealth, again, immigration and migration, again, education and development. And so what you have there is this very thoughtful, evidence-based, and informed framework that gives individual communities like, in this case, New Orleans and Baton Rouge will be working in their respective places to leverage the assets and the resources and the experiences of the folks who make that commitment. And then we will create a space for us to learn from and with each other. That might look, for instance, like Baton Rouge saying, as they prepare to do police reform because of Alton Sterling's murder, we have some lessons in New Orleans with regard to state violence against citizens who've been killed by police. What have we done in response to that? So there'll be some learning spaces where hopefully we can not only learn from each other, but we can build power together so that we can affect things like state level policy that impact the work that we're trying to do. Just some guiding principles, and then I'll sit down. There must be an accurate recounting of history, both local and national. So this truth-telling is critical. When we first started this tricentennial conversation, Cal and I have had the privilege of co-chairing the racial reconciliation with a couple of our colleagues. One of the things that is clear to us, and to see you, Dr. Freddie, and others in the room, is that the truth about where we come from, who we are, and the contributions we've made have not accurately been portrayed. And where they have accurately been portrayed, they haven't been introduced. So I had young people at my house this weekend, friends of my now deceased son, and we had a chance to view 13, Ava DuVernay's documentary about mass incarceration and the 13th Amendment. And when I tell you the revelatory ahas that they had, these are 21, 22-year-old young adults, they had absolutely no clue about the history and how baked in policies of racialized approaches to so-called public safety and criminal justice They are a part of this country's creed. Like, it is literally a part of who we are as a country. And you could see them having these moments, and one of them said to me, well, Mr. Flo, they call me Pops too. He said, we never learned this in school. This is the same young man who spent 90 days in the local jail on a trumped-up charge of armed robbery, who then was released with no charges filed. In what some might call the most dangerous local jail in America next to Rikers. These are everyday events that are happening that we get a chance by way of this truth-telling to create a space that allows us to see ourselves in society and to have much more robust and meaningful discourse with our colleagues across the racial and class divides. Second is a clear and compelling vision, accompanied by a set of ambitious but achievable goals, both long-term and short-term, will be developed, and progress must be regularly assessed. You heard earlier some examples, whether it's the welcome table and very specific projects that came out of that. There has been work across a breadth of issues by way of expanding access to health care, looking at mass incarceration issues, the ongoing education, so-called education reform discussions. The expectation is that we will not just have truth-telling, but we will actually start to put markers in place that let us know, are we spending our time wisely? Are we building relationships that actually move us down the road and create progress? And there is some expectation around that by design. The expectation also is that the process will be expansive and inclusive in all respects, and must have a deep and unyielding commitment to understanding different cultures and experiences and perspectives that coexist in the community, recognizing and acknowledging the interdependence of the variety of approaches to seeking enduring racial equity, reaching out to non-traditional allies in order to broaden support for meaningful change. That's a tough one. And giving every participant an opportunity to tell his or her story in a respectful and supportive setting. There is some expectation that we'll create spaces that allow us to do it. Whether that's healing circles, we believe people will develop spaces that make sense for the communities that they live in, that also provide an opportunity for other folks to be invited into those conversations so that we can strengthen each other. The process of healing requires the building of trust and must be viewed as a win-win process. And there will be a commitment to some form of reparative or restorative justice and to policies that can effectively foster systemic change. So the reason those lanes of segregation in law and economy were very specifically scripted out is so that we can look at things that the evidence tells us is either a barrier for the process of transformation or that represent opportunities for us to work together to create transformational spaces. This is important. A thoughtful and comprehensive communication strategy will be designed to keep the entire community informed, even those who are neither involved in nor supportive of the process. I will add to that.
I'm sorry.
That's what people say, what? What we are also looking to do is find ways to communicate with each other that are healing and that are respectful. Right? There is a way that the narrative has been created, and there is support for communication constructs that harm us collectively and respectively. What we're looking to do is understand how those systems are set up, how those practices have been allowed to flourish, and how to undermine, really how to destroy practices that actually harm us individually and harm us collectively. And there's a real opportunity there for us. We think it's a way to actually shift and change people's spirit and to be able to move public will in a way that allows us to build power to get something done that really does look transformational. There will be a broadly understood way of dealing with the tensions that inevitably arise. That is the last point of value, and one that came up even as we have begun to build this process and to build our partnerships. What are we going to do? How are we going to act with each other in the meantime? Right? As we build this work, we are going to step on each other's toes. White, black, Latino, our Asian friends, our Native American friends who were here before any of us, right? Because we don't understand each other necessarily, because we come from different spaces and have beliefs that are in conflict with each other, the intention is that we are going to establish strategies that anticipate that we're going to wound each other in this discussion, that we're going to step on each other's toes. That's actually what we know is going to happen. That should be no surprise for any of us. The real opportunity for us is how do we create a space to actually not only anticipate that, but to accommodate what that looks like, and we each get a chance to be a part of this. I think on behalf of the original partners in the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation work, what we're asking for, in partnership with Kellogg Foundation and a number of communities around the country who will also be doing this, and from whom and with whom we'll be learning, is a commitment. Commitment to see, as Baldwin said, the time is always now. Not only for us to do the truth telling, not only for us to do the kind of healing and relationship building that can heal us and that brings us together and empowers us, but to actually achieve the transformation that we have been talking about for much longer than I think many of us would like to. I'll close with a reflection I had yesterday. Clearly, MLK Day, I'll be candid with you, I tend to have mixed feelings about how commercialized the day has become, and so I tend to be more quiet than I probably should be considering my position. But there were a few good things that came out of the day. One, I reread Letter from a Birmingham Jail. If you haven't done it recently, you should. It is a reminder of how powerfully visionary Dr. King was, and the movement was, as he would say. It was not just him, it was many folks, and pushing us to move into this now that Baldwin talks about, and being really not just visionary, but almost being courageous and bold, and asking for things that many folks thought were unreasonable. The other thing that came to mind as I was reading it is, in that context, it was segregation, black, white. It was a very simple discussion. We are now having a much more complex conversation about more than whether you could sit on the front of the bus or whether you could drink from the same water fountain. And we're having a discussion that is both interracial and intraracial. New Orleans in particular has a long history of really strange dynamics within races and across races. Whether it's issues of colorism and interracial bias, things that we typically are very uncomfortable with, that fall under this idea of racial hierarchy that has undermined our capacity to be seen as full humans. We want to explore those issues in ways that make sense and in ways that really help us. We're asking you guys to not only make a commitment yourself, but to pull others in across a breadth of professions and communities and spaces to really help us be successful in thinking about how we can make the most of this opportunity. So I appreciate the chance to come and share some of this work. Thank you.